I've been promising to make a recording showing some of the stuff I've learned about Mutable, so here it is. This is a basic third-person template project. You need to make sure the Daz to Unreal and the Mutable plugins have both been enabled, which will make you restart it. There's nothing special in this project yet. I can just start it, run around, and that's just the starting point. So in Daz Studio, I've got a basic Genesis 9 character. Normally you would probably send this over with just the body, but so I don't have to filter stuff later. I'm just going to have a t-shirt and shorts on here to simplify things. Normally for me, I would delete the eyebrows and the eyelashes, I think, because I would send those over as kind of like customization, almost like clothing objects later on, so I'm going to remove those. The mouth, eyes, tear, I'm going to leave all that. So I'm going to take this character, send it over using Daz to Unreal. I'm going to use the convert to epic skeleton option so that I don't have to deal with retargeting once I'm in Unreal. Also, even though I'm going to be using morphs later, I'm not going to include them in this part of the character. I'm going to transfer those over in a later portion of the tutorial. So I'm just going to name this person Mutable Tutorial Character to get us started. Combining identical materials, converting it up to skeleton, and sending that over. So over here, your character is importing. This is something I haven't figured out how to get rid of yet. The options you choose here don't really matter. This is it merging the character skeleton with the epic skeleton. So I'm just going to hit commit and save and yes. And it doesn't matter really what it does with that skeleton, because at the end it's going to be sharing the skeleton with the mannequin. So it's not going to have, it's actually going to be using this other skeleton. So now we've got the character over here. They're in. I am going to create a new mutable customizable object. We'll name this CO character. Alright, so I'm going to open that up. I forget if I need a name for this. I'm just going to name it the character object. I'm going to add a skeletal mesh. That mesh is going to be our tutorial character, and what you're going to see here is there's one mesh pin for each of the mesh, or the sections of the mesh in the character. So I'm going to take each of those, drag it out to a mesh section, which will go to a mesh component. On the mesh component, we need to set a reference skeletal mesh. I think this was the mesh that shows up if it's still compiling the character in any way. It's kind of the default. This name will matter for when you're referencing it in the character's blueprint later. So if you want to break up the character into multiple meshes on different components, you would have multiple mesh components. In my case, I'm just going to have one component to keep it simple. I'm going to call it character mesh, and that name's how you would distinguish between them if you want to have multiples in the character. So I'm going to repeat this for each of these parts of the objects. I recommend dragging these off and creating the sections, just because you'll see over here it's automatically setting up the materials. If you just create a mesh section and then pin it, then you also have to set the material. So I find it easier just to drag each one off. And if there's parts of the character you didn't want to bring over, you decide to filter something out, you can just leave it out of this and it won't show up in the on the other end after you've made the customizable object instance. We'll get to that soon. Alright, a little messy, but you get the point. Could connect the component out to the character object, hit compile, and now you'll see the character is here with all the pieces. So like I mentioned before, like I could disconnect the legs, compile it. Now the legs aren't there, but the character will still be functioning. So anyways, that is done. Now I'm going to close this, and from that new customizable object, I'm going to create a new instance. So there's my instance. I'm just going to save it like that. And as far as just setting up the character, we're pretty much done now. So I'm going to go into Content, Third Person, Blueprint, and find the Blueprint character. On the mesh for the Blueprint character, this is that the mannequin that you see when you hit play. I am going to add to that mesh a customizable skeletal. Here I'm going to choose my instance that I just made, and here is where that component name matters. I named it character mesh before, so I'll hit compile. Now I'm going to hit play, and my character is in there. There's no customization happening yet, but we've got the character set up. So we'll start doing customizations next. Alright, so for the second part of this, I'm going to bring over the shapes. So I'm going to go back to my character in Daz Studio. I am going to transfer them a second time. We'll just name this shapes, mutable tutorial shapes. I'm going to export morphs. I've already set some morphs. We'll see them on the other side. Keep the convert to epic skeleton. One difference is this material combine method. I'm going to use combine all. This is something I made specifically for working with Mutable. This is going to combine everything and sharing one mesh section basically with one material. The material's not going to work on the other end, but that's okay because we just really want it for the shape. So I'm going to send it like that. Same thing, skeleton doesn't really matter. Alright, so now I've got this guy. It's the same character, no material, has some morph targets. And I put a height one here so we can show that later on that the skeleton is resizing. So again, I'm going to make another customizable object. We'll call this one shapes. Bring in the skeletal mesh again. Choosing the shapes mesh. So what's convenient here is now because the mesh has all been combined, there's only one pin here to work with. So I'm going to create this mesh morph stack definition. So this breaks out all the different morphs that are available on the character. And I'm going to apply that the values that we set on these to the mesh to give us another mesh. So for each of these, I'm going to drag off and make a parameter. The parameters here are the parameters here are what will show in the object instance and what you'll be able to modify at runtime to change the character. So these are all kind of your inputs into the final product. So I'm just going to make a float parameter for each of these. in this case I don't actually need the output because I'm just going to be using this. I'm going to be using exports out of this file in the other file that I made previously. So I'm going to take this mesh and export it as a pin. And what these pins do is they just make these values accessible in any other customizable object file. So I'm going to name this one base shape, I think, and I will make another one for when the morphs have been applied. And we'll call this target shape. I'm going to compile that and save it. There are some crashes in here, so I recommend saving occasionally. So now I'm going to go back to my character file. And this, unfortunately, is we're using a experimental node here. For the non-experimental versions, there's some that are a little nicer to use, but for the experimental node, it's only one input in, one input out. So I gotta do this setup once for each of these sections. Let's see, we're going to use mesh reshape, and I'm going to import from the shapes the base shape, and I'm going to import from the shapes the target shape. And then I'm also going to this is going to reshape the vertices. I am also going to use reshape skeleton and recompute normals. I've had some issues with specific assets where recomputing normals crashed. So later when adding like clothing items and stuff, you may not want to check this right away. You might want to save everything, verify it's working, and then check it again afterwards. I've done this asset earlier though, so I think everything should be fine here. I'm going to check recompute normals. And then I've got to redo this for each of these entries. So I'm just going to copy, paste, and I will fast forward this so you don't have to watch me do each one of these. Alright, so I've connected each of these. It's not pretty, but basically each of these mesh is now running through a mesh reshape node, which is the experimental one. What's really great about this node is that it has this reshape skeleton option, so when the morphs reshape the character, they can also reshape the skeleton to match the new size of the character. One thing I noticed when I hit compile here is the character changed significantly. This is because I forgot to set defaults in the shapes file, so I'm going to go back and do that real quick. So for each of these inputs, you can set a default and a range. For this one, I'm going to use 0 to 1. For this one, I'll use 0 to 1 with a default of 0. This one, I will do -1 to 1, default to 0, and same thing here, default to 0, -1 to 1. It looks like those defaults didn't pass through automatically. That's okay though. I'm going to just set my values here. You can use the sliders. As you can see, the character is reshaping. And hit play here. My character is here. And as I reshape them, they can reshape there, and it all works. So next we'll be swapping out clothing items. There's one more setting I missed for the magic resizing of the skeleton with the morphs here. On the mesh reshape nodes, there's a selection method, only selected. I'm going to change that to all but selected since I'm leaving the list empty. So then all the bones will be part of the reshaping of the mesh. So now if I compile that and bring this character up, you can see that they function. Let's move this over a little more. And the skeleton resizes and it works. Alright, so next we're going to add some swappable clothing. I'm going to add a jacket group, and we'll add a couple jackets that we can swap. So I'm going to go back into my character customizable object. And then off of the character object, I'm going to drag off of the children, and I'm going to choose an object group. I'm going to call this the jacket group. And I'm going to have this be a one or none because you're going to choose either no jacket or one of the jackets as an option. Default value will be none, no jacket. For the next part, this character mesh name will be important. So the mesh component name that you're going to connect the jacket to. So I'm going to compile, save this, bring up Daz Studio again. This is the same character. I've just added a couple jackets to the character. So I'm going to select one of the jackets. It's attached to the character. That's important so it maintains the shaping. Say send to Daz to Unreal. We'll call this jacket 01. It does not get the morphs because we're going to use the shapes customizable object that we created to share the morphs to the jacket. I'm converting to epic skeleton, and don't forget to change if you had this on combine all to change it back to either combine identical or no combine. You don't want to have all the surfaces combined like we did for the shapes. Same thing with the skeleton, just hit commit and save, and it's going to get swapped out for the epic skeleton. Alright, so now you've got our jacket. I'm going to create another customizable object. The name here for the base object will be the name that shows up in the list for the drop down. So I'm going to just call this jacket 01. This is very similar to when we made the characters. Going to create a skeletal mesh. It's the jacket. Bringing each of these mesh sections out. I'm going to do this without attaching the shapes to start. Now, for this part, it's different. We're going to add to mesh component instead, and this is where the name I said was important. We're going to add to the mesh component from our character, which we called character mesh. And we're going to attach all those. Attach this. And this base object we're going to attach to the external object. So on the character, we're going to attach it to the jacket group. So I'm going to compile that. We're going to go back to our character, compile this, and most likely it's not going to work because, yeah, it's missing from here. I don't know if there's a way to refresh this without restarting. This is a bug I run into, is once I've set this up, I have to restart the editor. So I'll restart it and I'll be right back. Okay, after restarting the editor, you'll see there's a jacket group now, and jacket 01's there, and it'll appear on the character. You'll notice two things. One, it's not resizing with the character, and two, there's a lot of penetration. We're going to fix the resizing right now. The hiding the parts underneath the jacket we will do in the next section. So I'm going to go back to the jacket, and we're going to do the same thing we did on the character, where we do a mesh reshape node. I'm going to take the base shape, okay, import it from our shapes. Take the base shape and the target shape. Same thing, we're going to import it from the shapes. I do not think I need to reshape the skeleton. We probably want to recompute normals, but I'm not going to touch that yet. I'll set that later because that's the one that occasionally causes a crash. So I want to have everything saved and then turn it on in case it breaks something. Not super pretty, but I think you get the point. I compile that, and I think I need to compile the main character also. And I'm going to pause the recording while I figure out what happened. Actually, there's just a small thing. I missed connecting this pin, which was the primary part of the jacket. So once I attach that, now the jacket is also resizing with the character. I can play the game with or without the jacket. So I'm going to bring the second jacket in to show two different options. So I'm going to go over here, select the other jacket. Call it jacket 02. Make a new customizable object for that jacket. The name is, again, the name that's going to show up in the list. So I'm going to call it jacket 02. Create the skeletal mesh. It is jacket 02. This one has a few more parts. Even though I'm going to put the other reshape node in, I'm going to drag these off first. As I mentioned before, if you don't, then these materials aren't set automatically and you got to go. This one didn't set anyway. And you got to go find them. Interesting. I'm not sure what those sections are. We may just ignore them for now. So I'm going to add the mesh component because I want to add this onto the character. I think the name was character mesh. Again, that's just matching the name of this mesh here. If you want to have multiple mesh components, you could connect it to a different one. So I'm just going to add the two that actually have materials. Bring in the reshape node. Import the base shape from our shapes. And import the target shape from our shapes. And connect this to the character's jacket group. And again, that's not going to work until I restart the editor, so I'm going to restart that. All right, and after restarting the editor, I can open up my character instance, and the second jacket is now an option. And it should resize with the character and be playable. So as you're coming up with different parts of the clothing, like pants, shoes, etc., you'll just make more of these object groups attached to the children pin on your main character object. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to hide geometry underneath parts like the jacket where things might be poking through. This part has been very crashy for me, so make sure to save before moving on to this. So right now I'm in jacket 2 where it's got the long sleeves and it's like the arms poke through and stuff sometimes. So what I'm going to do here is make a modifier. This modifier is going to be a clip mesh with mesh. And there are multiple ways to do this. There's ways to do it by UV or texture, by a mesh that matches another mesh. Having tried a bunch of them, this is the simplest one. I've kind of like settled on using this one, but there are lots of other ways to do this, so you might want to try those. So off of clip mesh with mesh, I'm going to make a static mesh, and I am going to choose a cylinder that's just kind of built into Unreal. So once I've chosen the cylinder shape, when I click here, you'll see that the cylinder is actually visible in the preview. And I'm going to move this to cover the arms. And there we go, probably not perfect, but it's a start. I'm going to copy that and just drag the copy over, rotate it, pop into place. And actually, I'm going to drag this one down to cover the hand just so you can kind of see that it's, make it real obvious that it's working. Connect this modifier too. Now the next thing is that on these two, we need to put a tag to tell it so it can match up for what to hide. So I'm going to use the tag body. You can make up whatever you want. You're probably going to want layers like, you know, the underclothing, outer clothing, etc. to so you can choose like a jacket might hide multiple layers of clothing. So it might hide like the body and maybe shirts. You'll have to figure out what set of tags you want and how you want to organize that all. So I've done that. I'm going to go to the body and let's see, make sure that for the arms, so it's visible there, that the tag body is enabled so that the arms are part of the body, so the jacket should hide the body. Save that, and then hopefully when I go here you will see yes. So while the jacket is enabled, those cylinders are hiding the things that are tagged body. The shirt is not tagged body, so it's still poking through, but you see the arms are not anymore. And then you can add a bunch of shapes. You might want to add a square on the back to kind of cover that, and just whatever you need to kind of match it all up. So you'll see when I switch back to jacket 1, that modifier is no longer applied. The hand reappears. I can go in here, adjust that back up some. I think you have to compile the character also, and then so the hand is back. So that's how I normally hide things. You'll have to kind of figure out your layering. Each of these will have to be tagged with its layers, and then the different clothing items, for instance, if you have like a shirt layer, you may want to label those as shirts, then the jackets can know to hide shirts as well. So I think that's everything I was going to cover in this first video. So hopefully it's become apparent, but the reason I've broken these out the way I have is putting the shapes in this file has a couple advantages. One, if I decide I need more shapes than these 4, I just need to replace them here. These pins are imported everywhere else, so if I add a 5th shape here, all the clothing, the characters, everything will have those extra shapes available without having to touch every single file. Also, the way it's broken out currently, I can add multiple jackets, multiple shirts without having to modify the character. I only have to modify the character to add the different groups that are used to apply the clothing. So like once I add a shirt group, I don't need to touch the character again to add shirts. I only have to add a customizable object for each shirt, hide things as necessary, and attach the shapes. So hopefully that's been informative. I'll probably follow up with another video about how to swap materials, apply colors to materials for the characters, for the clothing, etc.